It's time to shine a spotlight on one of the most important sites in all of biblical archaeology. It's the Galilean city of Beit She'an, which had important strategic value across multiple historical epochs. Long abandoned, it was first excavated in 1921 by a team from the University of Pennsylvania. In 1933, archaeologist G.M. Fitzgerald joined the work on behalf of the University of Pennsylvania Museum, carrying out a deep cut in the large mound at the site, also known as Tel el-Hisn. His findings indicated that the site was occupied at the beginning of the late Neolithic or early Chalcolithic periods, namely the 6th and 5th millennia BCE. Pottery analysis led to the conclusion that there was intermittent settlement up to the early Bronze Age I, from 3200 to 3000 BCE, resuming in early Bronze Age III. Graves dating from 2000 to 600 BCE had already been discovered in 1926, representing the city's ancient Canaanite period. Excavations in the cemetery to the north of the Tel uncovered burial caves from various periods, including clay anthropoid coffins dating to the period of Egyptian domination. In 1983, excavations were conducted under the auspices of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, continuing from 1989 to 1996 under the prominent Israeli archaeologist Amichai Mazar. At least 18 ancient cities, built one on top of another, were revealed in those excavations. The Egyptian period, dating to the 15th century BCE, is represented by Egyptian hieroglyphs inscribed on a victory stela, ascribed to Pharaoh Seti I, which in turn was found inside a large Canaanite temple. One of the most important finds near the temple is the lion and dog stela, which depicts two scenes of combat between two beasts. It was also determined that the temple was in fact built on top of an earlier one. Mazar also excavated the residence of the Egyptian governor at the time. In our area, we cleaned and examined the previously excavated building 1500, the level 6 Egyptian governor's residency, and we continued digging under its floors in order to fully explore its phases and to prepare it for preservation. It became apparent that the thick brick walls of this building were set on basalt stone foundations. When we excavated below these foundations, an earlier building emerged, which appears to be contemporary with the beginning of the 20th dynasty. This earlier building was constructed in a typically Egyptian manner, with brick walls without stone foundations. Several of its rooms had mud brick floors, a technique well known from Egypt. The site also shows evidence of destruction by fire around 1150 BCE, after which the Egyptians lost control of the area. The general background of the disappearance of Egyptian rule is certainly related to changes which took place in the geopolitical structure of the country with the penetration of the Sea Peoples and the emergence of Israel. This was a period of unrest and insecurity, and it is possible that an incident such as the Midianite foray into the Jezreel Valley and Gideon's pursuit to the area of Beit She'an are examples of events which might have caused the destruction of Beit She'an. Mazar raised some important questions based on his excavations. To what extent were the Canaanites part of the population of Beit She'an? And what kind of interaction did they have with the Egyptians? The unconsidered trifles at the site include implements for grinding cereals, for cooking, and for textile production, all of which are in the local Canaanite style, perhaps indicating the presence of Canaanite women at the city. Did Canaanite women and their families live at Beit She'an alongside the Egyptians, cooperating with them? Might they even have been married to Egyptian officials or military personnel? Might they have been inhabitants of nearby local settlements working for the Egyptian garrison without actually living at the site? Or were such objects merely purchased in neighboring Canaanite towns? All of these are open questions when it comes to the science of archaeology, and the answers require a good bit of sleuthing. An additional controversy revolves around Israel Finkelstein's suggestion that there was an occupation gap at Beit She'an after the Egyptians left. Mazar responded that there is a great amount of continuity from the Egyptian to the post-Egyptian period in town planning, pottery, and other material data. He also pointed to carbon-14 testing of some carbonized grain from a small bin at Beit She'an, dating to the 11th century BCE. That's precisely when Finkelstein would have us believe that the site was unoccupied, having lowered the period of the site's occupation to the 10th century BCE. Finkelstein, of course, has a vested interest in substantiating his low chronology, which ascribes remains traditionally dated to the Solomonic age to the Omride dynasty, a good century down the pike. Beit She'an is no exception. The fate of Beit She'an during the 11th century BCE is of particular interest in light of the mention of Beit She'an as the site where the Philistines hung the bodies of Saul and his sons after the battle on Mount Gilboa. ויבואו פלישתים לפשט את החללים, וימצאו את שאול ואת שלושת בניו נופלים בהר גלבוע. ויכרתו את ראשו, ויפשיטו את כליו, וישימו את כליו בית השטרות, ואת גווייתו תקעו בחומת בית שאן. וישמעו אליו יושבי יבאש גלעד, ויקחו את גוויית שאול, ואת גוויית בניו מחומת בית שאן, ויבואו יבשה, וישרפו אותם שם. But how much of this story is history, and how much legend? Archaeology asks some broader questions. What were the Philistines doing at Beit She'an? And why Beit She'an in the first place? After all, Saul was killed on Mount Gilboa. The archaeological picture relating to this period was unclear due to the ambiguity of the University of Pennsylvania excavation results. But Mazar's excavations now allow us to better define this period. For one thing, the finds contain no traces of Philistine presence in the town, and we can deduce that the biblical account of the death of Saul at best relates to an historical event in which the Philistine forces carried out a military campaign from Philistia to the Gilboa and the Beit She'an Valley, but never occupied this region for any length of time. The town of the 11th century was later destroyed by fire. During the reigns of David and Solomon, Beit She'an became part of the United Israelite Kingdom. The University of Pennsylvania excavations uncovered many remains from the period of the monarchy, levels 4 and 5. But the documentation is confusing. We opened a new excavation area adjoining the western slope of the tell with the purpose of examining remains from Iron Age II and later. This area has so far yielded remains of a large and well-planned building dating to the 8th century BCE. It appears to have been an elaborate version of the 4-room buildings of the Iron Age. A large central hall was flanked by rooms on all 3 sides. The back rooms are beyond the limit of the area, and 2 additional rooms west of the central hall were close to the slope of the mound and were heavily destroyed by erosion. This fact eliminates the possibility that there was a city wall protecting the Iron Age town, as was the case in most other Iron Age towns. In the excavated parts of the building, a thick destruction layer contained fallen remains of the upper floor and the upper parts of the walls, and burnt beams. With a bit of deduction, we can surmise that this destruction was the result of the Assyrian conquest of the northern part of Israel during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III in 732 BCE. In the layer of burnt debris and mud brick collapse, numerous pottery vessels typical of this period were buried. A large loom with over 120 loom weights was found along a wall in the main hall. Above the Iron Age II remains in Area P, an occupation level from the Hellenistic period was uncovered. The remains include buildings with thin stone walls like those of ordinary houses, large courtyards and baking ovens. 2 to 3 subphases were observed. A rich assemblage of pottery vessels of this period was found, including stamped Rhodian handles, molded Megarian bowls, and terracotta figurine fragments. Ptolemaic coins and 2 silver Tyrian tetradrachmas are evidence for the date of the settlement, namely from the late 3rd century BCE to the 1st century BCE. Practically nothing was found in our excavation which could be related to the Roman period. It appears that at this time, when the large Roman city was founded to the south of the tell, the mound itself remained unoccupied, aside from a monumental temple built on its summit. In sum, Mazar's excavations provide a more sound base for interpreting the previous excavations. They also correct misconceptions concerning the settlement continuum and the character of the settlement on the tell over various periods. Beyond the excavations of the tell itself, we should point out that during the Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods, Beit She'an became known as Scythopolis, or city of the Scythians, who were probably mercenaries that settled there. Excavations were carried out mainly in the valley south and southwest of the tell. During the rule of the Seleucids of Syria in the 2nd century BCE, Scythopolis was accorded the status of a polis, that is, a Greek-style city. The houses had brick walls on stone foundations with rooms around a stone-paved courtyard. Scythopolis was subsequently conquered and destroyed by the descendants of the Maccabees, the Jewish dynasty known as the Hasmoneans, at the end of the 2nd century BCE. A fierce conflagration left ceramic vessels and other utensils covered in a thick layer of ash. Among the finds were many imported pottery vessels, including dozens of wine amphorae, from the Greek islands, especially from Rhodes, with seal impressions on the handles. Then, in another half century, the year 63 BCE to be exact, came Rome, under the illustrious general Pompey. With the help of my legions, I effectively established Roman rule in Judea, and Scythopolis was to play a central role in the administration of the area. It is the largest city of the Decapolis, a league of 10 Hellenized polis, 9 of them east of the Jordan River. Scythopolis represents an outstanding Roman example of high-level city planning and construction. Impressive freestanding gateways have been built to mark the boundaries of the urban area. The ancient Tell now served as the Acropolis, and the main temple of the city stood there. The buildings, as well as the street pavements, were of dark basalt stone, characteristic of the region. The public buildings were faced with hard limestone brought from Mount Gilboa, as were architectural elements, such as columns and carved components. Several colonnaded streets crossed the civic center at the foot of the Tell. The eastern bathhouse included a square hall that served as the frigidarium, or cold room, of the bathhouse. The room's wall and floor were covered with marble slabs. A large latrine with a colonnaded courtyard had rows of evenly spaced stone toilet seats along its walls and drainage channels beneath them. The monumental theater of Scythopolis is the best preserved Roman building from Roman times. It's 110 meters in diameter and was built on a hillside with its rear wall partly cut into the bedrock. Its facade faces the Tell, where the temple of Zeus stood, and was surrounded by plazas. It had 7,000 limestone seats in 3 blocks. The amphitheater was located on the plateau south of the Roman Civic Center. A hippodrome had been built there, of which very little is known since the amphitheater was built on its western part. The oval amphitheater encloses an area 82 meters long and 72 meters wide. The arena was surrounded by a 3.2 meter high wall with 10 to 12 rows of seats for 5,000 to 7,000 spectators. At the center of the seating block on the north side was a platform for dignitaries, an orchestra, and the game organizers. On the western and eastern sides of this wall were openings for direct access to the arena. Several rooms along the wall around the arena may have been cages for wild animals, but are we really sure? Performances at the amphitheater probably included contests between gladiators, the hunting of wild animals, sporting events, and more. In January of the year 749, Scythopolis, formerly known as Beit She'an and now known as Beit She'an, was completely destroyed by an earthquake, as documented in Jewish literary sources. Bearing witness to the disaster, a number of skeletons were also found in the excavations. The ancient and classical Hellenistic city fell into a long slumber, which only the spade of the archaeologists has, in the last century, awakened once more. There is no single site that spans so many centuries and so many cultures, weighing in so profoundly on what we know about the land of Israel in ancient times. And we cannot but feel that Beit She'an still has stories to tell.